Be Quiet has revamped its Dark Base Pro 900 high-end flagship, now offering a Revision 2 that, for the record, largely offers changes we didn't ask for. Still, apparently a lot of people wanted a power supply shroud, and some wanted faster fans for this largely silence-focused case. Today we're back with the Dark Base Pro 900 Revision 2 to see how its performance and build have changed since the first revision. The new revision is $20 more expensive than the original DBP 900, but we'd expect price will eventually fall closer to the original $250 price point of the Dark Base Pro 900 case that we reviewed last year. Before that, this video is brought to you by the EVGA CLC 280 liquid cooler. People ask me how I keep cool during the summer with all this hair. Well, I've tried a lot of different products, and few do exactly what I need. Many of them cause tangles or worse. EVGA CLC 280 helps keep my core temperatures low during hot benchmarking sessions. The CLC 280 is price competitive and focuses on performance for value, offering a 280 liquid cooler at an affordable price. Get yours at the link in the description below. Hair mounting kit sold separately. This is the Dark Base Pro 900 Rev2. If you remember the original, we actually liked the case overall. The Dark Base Pro 900 had excellent build quality. It has interesting features. Not all of them are useful, like the Qi charger, for instance. A lot of people probably don't care about that, but if you wanted it, it was in the top front of the case, still is. So it has some interesting features. It does things differently. It's terribly expensive at $250, but the price wasn't all that unfair for the original Dark Base Pro 900. It's high. Not unfair, but it's high. The case overall has always billed itself as primarily a silence-focused case. The name of the company is Be Quiet! Exclamation point. So the name pretty much explains what they're going for with all of their cases, given that nice exclamation point at the end of the sentence. So with the Be Quiet Dark Base Pro 900, the primary change that we're interested in, the one we're testing, is the fan speed change. They've gone up from 1,000 RPM to 1,600 RPM, quite a significant change in RPM, but because the front panel is still ultimately pretty closed off, it's hard to say how much that'll matter. Because you can put the fastest fans in the world in there, if they don't have access to a lot of air and they're fighting to pull air in through the sides, you're ultimately relying on static pressure, the power of the fan when most of it's blocked off, and ultimately you will be bottlenecked by that front panel. But the question is one of a greater discussion on fan RPMs versus attempting to silence a case. This is something we've discussed before, where there's kind of two ways to achieve silence. You either open the whole thing up, which of course exposes it to dust as well, another fault of the argument. You can open the whole thing up and run lower RPM fans. That's going to be pretty damn quiet because they're running at slower speeds. Or you close it all off and run higher RPM fans and try and fight the enclosure to bring air in. And either way can work. It just kind of depends on the design and how well it's been done. Be Quiet designed the Dark Base Pro 900 exceptionally well. The foam padding used, first of all, giant sheet of tempered glass is great for dealing with the low frequency noises, low hums, and noise that fans often make. The padding on some of the paneling in the case helps with the higher frequency noises, like coil whine, because the idea is that the sound wave is going to hit the foam, break into some pieces, bounce around a whole bunch, and hopefully not really much of it will escape and get to the end user. So they always did well with that, but now we're looking at the changes. One of the other big changes we'll talk about here is the power supply shroud. The major difference in this revision is the addition of a PSU shroud. Someone asked for this, it wasn't us. The only mention of a power supply shroud in our original review was to point out that there was enough room for cables elsewhere, so it was actually unnecessary to even have a power supply shroud. The shroud must be removed in order to install the power supply, and the process of replacing it is annoying enough that it's easier just to leave it out. However, it's optional to install. It can be purchased separately to add to the Revision 1 cases if you wanted, and it's understandable that Be Quiet wants to offer as many features as possible in their flagship case. That said, power supply shrouds always pose a bit of a problem potentially for airflow. This case is massive enough that it might not matter as much. We'll see in the thermal section. But we never asked for the PSU shroud, as noted. There's so much space in the backside that you really almost just don't even need it. And you probably have a modular power supply anyway if you're spending almost $300 on a case. So not something we cared about, but either way, it's not harmful to offer more options. So there's that. Let's talk about the LED and the fan controller. The functionality here is basically the same as Revision 1, but there are also performance-silent toggles like the controller in the DB700. It now supports up to 8 fans rather than 4. LEDs are 12 volts now and can be connected and synced with other standard 4-pin strips, and can be controlled via a button on the front panel, formerly the reset button. The fans are still 140mm Silent Winds 3s, but they're 1600 RPMs rather than 1000. That has implications as noted for both thermals and noise, which we'll look at momentarily. Hard drive bay has changed a bit too. The original Dark Base Pro 900 had 9 available ports for 7 free-floating hard drive bays, while the Revision 2 has 5 ports for 3 bays. The lower 2 ports, the upper 2, since this case is invertible, have been converted to fit a 2-drive hard drive cage instead, so that the power supply shroud will fit as well. And to summarize, that's up to 3 single-slot hard drive bays above the shroud and 1 2-slot hard drive cage underneath the shroud. USBs changed, as with the Dark Base 700. Be Quiet has filled one of their USB 2.0 ports with USB 3.1 instead, Type-C, and the other USB 2.0 port has been replaced with a USB quick charge plug. Panel attachment's also a bit different. The thumb screws that hold on the glass panel have a weird, not quite flathead, not quite Phillips cross on them, and they thread onto posts rather than screwing into holes. So they're not technically screws, I mean, they kind of are, but the front panel now has 2 spring-loaded magnet attachments, one at the top, one at the bottom, rather than just one, and the screws you can just use fingers if you want, or if you do want a screwdriver, flathead or Phillips both work. Some owners of the original Dark Base Pro 900 wanted these upgrades, obviously, and if you want to buy them separately from Be Quiet, you can. So that's an upside. From the Be Quiet design document, they said the following: the new power supply shroud and hard drive slot covers will be available for customers using the first Dark Base Pro 900 version. The windowed side panel and additional hard drive cages will be offered separately as well. All right, let's get into the thermal testing here. This one's kind of interesting. So the primary comparison for this case will be Revision 1. We have plenty of other cases on the chart, but we're going to focus on the Dark Base Pro 900 Revision 1 because we already focused the Revision 1 versus everything else, and it was okay overall for what it is. So Revision 2 has faster fans. It's got a fan controller that works a little bit differently, and the results between the two cases should be different, but the amount of improvement seen, for example, opening the front panel, would approximately be the same. So check our previous review to see temperature deltas from other scenarios, like opening the front panel or taping off the mesh trim shut on the front. This mesh right here in the front, the only mesh in the front, we taped that closed in the original testing just for fun. And we have that in the original Dark Base Pro 900 review. We'll kind of cover it briefly here. But check the previous coverage basically for more of that. And also check the previous coverage for overall build thoughts or thoughts on installation, ease of installation, build features, all that stuff. We talked about it there. Absolutely no point going over it again because the inside of the case, other than the stuff I've already mentioned, it's all the same. So if you want to know what we think of the case, build quality and stuff like that, just watch the first review. And we're going to focus on thermals today. For Revision 2, we focused on testing with the fan controller. We plugged the case fans into the motherboard and configured them to 100% speed for baseline stock testing. And then for additional tests, we tried a few things. One, setting the controller to performance mode and the slider to maximum, because it is a slider. And another one was performance mode and slider to minimum, silent mode with slider to maximum, silent mode with slider to minimum, and so forth. So the fan speed slider in the front panel is stepless, so maximum and minimum settings are pretty easy to replicate, and that's what we used. We're starting with only the Dark Base Pro 900, then we'll move on to comparative numbers. This includes the old model. For the Dark Base Pro 900 Revision 2, CPU temperature was 56 degrees Celsius over ambient during the tortured test, and 55 degrees Celsius with the fans plugged into the controller and set to performance mode, then maxed out. Judging by the temperature, since we can't log RPM using a controller, it seems like the controller really does allow the fan to speed up at the full new speed. And for Revision 2 of the 900 results, using the controller from best to worst were as follows. Performance mode with maximum speed was best, silent mode with maximum speed, performance mode with minimum speed, and then silent mode with minimum speed. Even just in performance mode, going from minimum to maximum brought CPU DT to 63.9 degrees over ambient versus 55. Silent mode minimum RPM was by far the hottest test, and the only reason it didn't go higher than 71.7 degrees is that the CPU was hitting 100C and throttling hard. That's because 71.7 is over ambient, and it's also averaged. So we were actually hitting 100 in the middle of the test when it's the most torturous. This mode would only be advisable for lower TDP systems with low load levels, i.e. for browsing or desktop use. Compared to the old 900, stock versus stock temperatures are improved from 58.6 degrees to 56 degrees, not a huge change, and our other tests were specific conditions like removing the front panel entirely and inverting the layout. Comparatively with other cases, the original stock DBP 900 reached 58.6 degrees Celsius over ambient towards the warm end of our scale. With its higher fan speeds, the Revision 2 places more toward the middle alongside the Define R6 and S340 Elite. For how closed off the front panel is, that's okay. The DBP 900 is overall unimpressive for cooling, but it is also targeted more to the noise-sensitive audience and makes no claims to be a top-class cooler. The changes Be Quiet made are not significant enough to upset the charts, particularly because the front panel is so blocked off that the higher speed fans aren't able to get enough access to air to improve cooling in any substantial way. This is a matter of diminishing returns and starts boosting noise levels beyond what might be worth it to begin with. Cooling is okay, but not impressive. For just the DBP 900 GPU torture test, GPU DT averaged 47.6 degrees Celsius during the torture test with Furmark, and almost exactly the same using the controller at max speed and performance mode. The best to worst order of performance is the same as the CPU temperatures. Performance and max is the best, silence and max, performance and minimum, silence and minimum, and you get the idea. The range of temperatures was smaller, however, and even the silent and minimum average DT was only 56.5 degrees over ambient. Moving on to comparative GPU data, we were surprised how well the Revision 2 provided GPU cooling, especially since it added a power supply shroud to the case that could potentially restrict airflow anyway. A small part of this could be that we intentionally flipped the power supply over when reviewing the original because of restrictive ventilation on the bottom of the case, which may have caused the power supply to compete with the GPU for air. More importantly, there's the higher RPM fans and the lack of pre-installed hard drive bays to block the airflow path from the front of the case. Whatever the reasons, the Revision 2 has some of the coolest GPU temperatures we've logged recently, well below the original's average of 54.9 degrees Celsius. And a lot of that is just because of how hugely open the front of the case is. So even though the fans are blocked, all of the air is going straight to the GPU. Whatever the air is that the fans can bring in, it's not obstructed by anything. It's going into the GPU. The power supply shroud is designed in such a way that it doesn't eat too much of the performance, and also the case is so gigantic that the power supply shroud to video card distance is great enough that it's not really interfering much with the GPU cooler's ability to exhaust air. So that's why we're seeing the results we are. Next up, 3D Mark. GPU temperatures were slightly higher in 3D Mark stress testing than in the torture test, averaging 48.8 degrees Celsius over ambient. That's even farther below the original DBP 900's average of 57.5 CDT, and impressively below most of the other cases on our chart as well. GPU cooling is genuinely good in Revision 2, something we wouldn't necessarily expect from a noise-damaged case, but one that is a result of that higher RPM fan and just how damn large the case is. Rendering on the CPU with Blender, CPU DT was 38.4 degrees in the Blender test. That's fairly average and below, but within margin of error of the original DBP 900. When utilizing the GPU DT during the render was 24C, beaten by both the PMO1 and half X, but cooler than everything else. Noise levels are next. Even with all of Be Quiet's noise damping, running fans at 1600 RPM reached 43.2 to 43.4 dBA, as loud as the DB700 was, Darkbase 700, at max speed, or the Silverstone RL06. The quietest level we achieved using the fan controller was 32.4 dBA, only slightly above the N1303 with no fans in it, but keep in mind that the cooling is so bad that you really wouldn't want to use this setting for any kind of performance. The main advantage of having silent and performance toggles on the fan controller is that there are two channels, so two different groups of case fans can be set to two different speeds while being controlled by a single input. The way we used it, with both controllers flipped the same way, it should just be set to performance mode. That's because silent and minimum was at effectively the same noise level as performance and minimum, about 33 dBA, but performance and minimum scored better in most thermal testing. And fan RPM can be maxed out in performance mode, which is a huge bonus. So again, this becomes a greater discussion on, do you go the noisier fan route with a more open case, or do you do something more stifled and go with slower fans or faster fans to try and overcome them, which is what Be Quiet did. So they stuck with the original silent paneling focus, stuck faster fans in it, and the result is that the case is actually really freaking loud when the fans are maxed out. It's towards the worst end of the chart for noise if you consider noise bad. But you can control it pretty easily. It's got a fan controller. There are two different sets of toggles you can do. So if noise is a problem for you, but you're okay with it when you're gaming, maybe you have headphones on or something like that, then it's not bad. It's just that the case does a weird thing where performance is good, actually overall, yes, but they're mixing both silence and performance in weird ways that ends up with either you have kind of mostly okay performance and good GPU performance when maxed out, but not great noise performance, or you have fantastic acoustic performance with not great thermal performance. And it's going to be up to you to set it the way that makes most sense. It's one of those things where it's not really set it and forget it unless you're okay with noise or you're okay with awful thermals. Maybe you can set it in the middle and it'll kind of be towards the louder end, but it does deviate from the original silence focus of the case, and that's different. Different for Be Quiet. It's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just that the case is trying to do two different things simultaneously when it can really only do one at any given time, and it's up to the user to figure out which one that is. So just keep that in mind. In performance, the Revision 2 has much better GPU cooling results than Revision 1, but that's because Revision 2 has faster fans, and the layout is still huge. 140mm Silent Wings fans sell for $20 a piece or more on Newegg. So upgrading an original DBP 900 to match Rev 2's performance is an expensive proposition, and cooling performance is the single best argument for purchasing the newer one versus the older one, but only if it applies when fans are running above 1,000 RPM. If you're planning on keeping them there or lower, then don't bother, basically. Revision 2 is a better performing case with a few more features than its predecessor, which we already liked. It's just altogether, is it worth $20 more and making the power supply installation even more annoying than it is to get the Revision 2? And we still like Rev 1 for what it does. Watch the original review for that. It's definitely not for everyone, but it's really damn good when it is for you. When it does fit your use case, Revision 1's a good case, and it's $20 cheaper. So this one's not bad. It's just if you were dying for the power supply shroud, sure, $20 is worth it. Or if you wanted the faster fans, but you don't want to buy your own separately or don't already have some, then I guess maybe it's worth it because the value proposition is there for the better fans. So that's it for this one. Very high-end flagship case. We know not a ton of people buy cases in this price class, but hopefully for those of you considering it, you've got a decent review now to refer to. And as always, go to store.gamersnexus.net to pick up some of our merch. We have this shirt. It's a limited edition shirt. Once they're gone, they're gone. We've sold through most of the inventory already, but we still have some left. And you can pick it up on store.gamersnexus.net. It's basically a foil, shiny version of our anniversary edition logo. Or you can pick up the mod mat there as well, which is a 4-foot by 2-foot computer building and modding surface. Go to patreon.com/gamersnexus if you prefer to help us out that way or get access to our Discord. Subscribe for more. I'll see you all next time.